Littleton Coin Company is ringing in the holiday season with daily deals. Visit littletoncoin.com for at least 15% off select products now through November 28th. Save on your favorite coins, such as Morgan Silver Dollars, Kennedy Half Dollars, commemorative quarters, and much more. But hurry, each day offers a new deal you don't want to miss. Visit us now at littletoncoin.com. That's littletoncoin.com. Littleton Coin Company, serving collectors since 1945.
And one method of doing so in the 10th century, China, involved crushing up smallpox scabs and then blowing them up the nose of a healthy person, which that just sounds horrendous. Can you imagine the smallpox scab sneezes you must have after some dude just blows some smallpox? My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Happy to have you back with us for, I believe it is the 64th episode this week. 64 episodes. My, how the time has gone by. This week we're talking about vaccines. Just going to try to tell you where they came from and how they got here. I'm not going to get political in any way. I'm not going to go either side. It's not about that. As you know, here on this podcast, we're just trying to find out how things happen, and that's what's going to unfold here. I'm hoping to tell you the story of how we get from snorting crushed up smallpox scabs to, possibly just a modern vaccine. We're gonna try to cover all bases here. But as normal, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started here. What am I watching? I just watched Top Gun Maverick. Just saw it. I finally saw it for free. They were never going to get my money just because it was, I don't know, it's just so expensive. I thought $20 to rent it was ridiculous. And then once it started to drop, I was like, well, as it continues to drop, it eventually will be free. And I was right. But it was a pretty good movie. And I loved the first one, of course. That was one of my favorite movies growing up. So I definitely... that's maybe another reason as well, because growing up, I was always just like, when is the sequel coming? When is the sequel coming? Like, the sequel was probably 20 years too late. When you think what the first one came out in, what I'm guessing 86, mid 80s, we're talking almost 40 years later they decided to make a sequel. I mean, that's crazy. But yeah, it was still pretty good. The first like 30 minutes of it was just kind of cringy when they were just shoving all of the different stuff from the first movie. I thought, I hope the whole movie's not like this, and thankfully it wasn't. I think they honestly follow the same kind of vehicle, kind of trajectory of the Fast and the Furious, where like they get together, and as soon as they get together, oh, there's a job. Like, oh, we need everybody has to go back to Top Gun because there's a big, we have to get, something we have to drop bombs on things. So that's what they kind of unite on and or unite together and fight against. But definitely worth your time if you get the chance. It's if you like it. I've heard people that have said I never even saw the first Top Gun, which I didn't realize people like that existed. But yeah, so if you didn't like the first one, you won't like the second one. But if you like the first one, check it out. What am I listening to? I mentioned this on the last BSB. Actually, I was listening to White Lies. Still listening a little bit now. It's an NPR podcast that explores a prison riot from the early 90s, and it connects it all the way back to the Cuban Revolution and the Mariela boat lift that brought a large amount of Cuban refugees over from Cuba to America in the early 80s. There's a lot going on there, a lot that they kind of, I guess expose. I'm not sure. It's a good listen if you're looking for something new, as I always am, and always are. I'm not sure which, but I'm always looking for new podcasts. Always, and that's why I say, because I do this part here, this segment right here, just so people, if you're wondering, if you're looking for a recommendation, that's as I am as well. So I always say, if you want to mention something on the Twitter page or on the website and throw a podcast out there that you want mentioned up here, I'll say it, because I mean, people are always looking for something different. But yeah, as I always say, if I can plug those podcasts, I can plug my own mini-sode. Every Thursday at 4:30 a.m., we do a bite-sized bio where I pick a person from history and just profile their life. Usually try to get it done in about 15 to 20 minutes, so it's kind of the bullet points, things I find interesting. We have covered some different stuff, and I tell you, I mean, it is, when you really get into this stuff, it's you find things like I've known about Marlon Brando my whole life, but I think maybe it's just because of my age. I didn't know about the whole, his son shot somebody in the face in his house, and Marlon Brando gave him mouth to mouth. I didn't know that, so that's that's kind of why I do that stuff. I want to find out different things about people that I don't know much about. But like I said, that happens every Thursday at 4:30 a.m. It is a Minnesota accompaniment. So the first like 5 or 10 minutes of that episode are usually actually used to cover the last HDTH and things that I didn't say, things that I want to say, kind of just a recap of the previous week's episode. But yeah, always, if you like what you hear here, you can head over to htthappen.com for more. There's transcripts and pictures and videos. Works cited, it's up there, so you guys can always see where I'm getting all my information from. On the socials, we are at htthappen, pretty much wherever you can find us. Twitter and Instagram right now. Got a lot of things coming down the pike. Even as recently as last night, I actually just started interviewing my father for a new project that we're working on. That's kind of either going to talk about his life or some certain parts of his life. And I tell you, I mean, I was not expecting. We just did the first day of interview yesterday, and it was mind already blown. My dad's lived a life. So that I may be sharing bits and pieces of that on here as time goes forward, but I'm not sure. But definitely going to be still trying to get some people on the podcast here in the next few weeks and months. I don't think there's much else to say. Yeah, I don't like to ramble too much. So without further ado, as we're known to do, here is the episode. So today we talk about vaccines and everything that goes into vaccines and everything that surrounds vaccines. We'll start with what is inoculation. Inoculation is the medical practice of introducing an agent into the body to stimulate immunity. The difference between inoculation and vaccination is that with inoculation, you are not introducing any dead or weakened germs, but instead you're actually being exposed to the same type of germ as would actually cause the disease. And if you do this right, it's supposed to generate lifelong immunity among certain diseases without any potential complications or side effects. There are a number of different types of inoculation. I'll list those off to you, and then we'll get into kind of the history of vaccination, inoculation, immunization overall. There's direct, covert, indirect, formal, informal, and subliminal. Those are all different types of inoculation. And what we'll see when we talk about vaccination and immunization, which I'll use all these terms synonymously, I think, throughout this time, even though I'm aware, just, for conversation's sake, that they're not all the same words, but I think it'll be easier to move about the space here to do it that way. But what we'll see is that the large driver in the evolution and production of these vaccines comes from smallpox. It is the fact that people continue to get the virus is what makes people want to create some sort of cure, and we'll find that they've been doing that for thousands of years. That is the real. When you look up the history of vaccines, it all starts with I believe it's Edward Jenner and Louis Pasteur, and we're going to get there definitely because they are a part of it. But we're going to start all the way in the back. We're going to go back to the history of smallpox, and so smallpox is believed to have first infected humans around the earliest times of agricultural settlements in civilization, which was about maybe 12,000 years ago. The earliest actual evidence of smallpox is believed to be with the Egyptians about 3,000 years ago, because they found some mummies that have some smallpox-like rashes and like familiar-looking lesions that kind of make it look as if they had been from people who had smallpox. Ramses V was someone who was said to have actually looks to have had smallpox. He had them all over his face and his body. The first actual written description of smallpox appears in 4th century China. There's also another written description of smallpox in 7th century India. So you see it a lot during that time. It has been suggested that smallpox was a major component in the plague of Athens that occurred in 430 BCE during the Peloponnesian Wars. And I'm saying all this to say this is one of the large, quote unquote, plagues of human existence, and kind of setting the stage for, because I didn't know this at all. I just assumed, I don't know. I definitely didn't know the story of vaccines at all, but I didn't know that it really all kind of surrounds one specific virus. Now, it's used for many different things, and of course, I think people have tried to, inoculate people from other things, but as far as the overall kind of spearheading of vaccinations comes from people trying to get rid of smallpox. And so, yeah, like I said, we see it. They thought it was a part of the plague of Athens, and that really ravages through the Roman Empire for 10, 15 years at least. There's another outbreak about 100 years later. Let's see, I have a quick timeline here of the smallpox spread throughout the world. So it's increased trade with China and Korea brings smallpox over to Japan. In the 7th century, Arab expansion spread smallpox into northern Africa, Spain, and Portugal. That's how we kind of get it into Europe. 11th century, the Crusades further spread smallpox in Europe. 15th century, Portugal occupies part of Western Africa, bringing more smallpox, which is spreading it around. 16th century, European settlers in the African slave trade import smallpox into the Caribbean, Central and South America, in addition to North America, of course. 17th century, European settlers then bring more smallpox to North America. And by the 18th century, everybody has it as Britain brings it over to Australia. And it is said that during the 18th century, the disease killed an estimated 400,000 Europeans each year, including 5 reigning monarchs, and was responsible for a third of all blindness. So this is, and we're about to get into the actual creation of the vaccines. I just really wanted to, I think you really have to know, because I didn't know. The most I knew about smallpox before I did this episode was like the smallpox blankets that, came over like Jamestown. Like literally. I don't know much about I don't really dabble in this stuff. I don't know much about medical stuff as it is. If you listen to this podcast, I don't know science. I don't know medicine. So I'm not going to be giving any real like hard weighing opinions. This is not going to be anything Joe Rogan-esque at all. I'm just trying to figure out where like the history, like when you look at vaccines, we get all the way up to here with the needle and you prick it and you're safe. But like, how did we get there? Like, that's always the question here. So I think I've pretty much hopefully kind of scared you with the smallpox to make you want to know why we need a vaccine for it. But from at least the 15th century, people in different parts of the world have attempted to prevent illness by intentionally exposing themselves to smallpox, different versions of it, and it is a practice known as variolation. And this is actually really interesting because the name variolation comes from la variole, which I do believe is Latin, I want to say, for smallpox. And so that's like the actual, that's what I mean about how deep and how kind of intrinsic smallpox is to the actual cause of like, or the creation of vaccines is like when the term for like, curing yourself, like in a vaccination comes from the word vaccine, or excuse me, smallpox. The earliest evidence of variolation comes from Africa, China, and India, which is, like we said earlier, some of the earliest written descriptions of needing or having smallpox come from those areas as well. And one method of doing so in the 10th century, China, involved crushing up smallpox scabs and then blowing them up the nose of a healthy person, which that just sounds horrendous. Can you imagine the smallpox scab sneezes you must have after some dude just blows some smallpox scabs right up your nose? But you'd be immune. Evidently, it worked for them, 1,000 years ago. I wonder if they're still doing that now. In India, they would repeatedly prick the skin of a person with an iron needle that had been dipped into smallpox pus, and like the pus. Like it's just such a. So in 1721, a woman named Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, she brought smallpox inoculation to Europe by asking that her 2 daughters be inoculated against smallpox, as she had seen in Turkey at the time, which I don't know if it was called Turkey at the time, it was still part of the Ottoman Empire, but she had seen it over there, and so she wanted her kids to have it done so they would all not die from smallpox. And so while that was happening in Europe, over in Boston, Massachusetts, I think it was actually the same year, 1721, there was a massive, I would call it massive because for the amount of people that it took out in the city, smallpox outbreak that had come from a ship that had come into port and it spread throughout the city. But when that happened, the people didn't know what to do about it. But there was a man named Cotton Mather, who had actually ended up owning some slaves, who knew about this whole idea of being inoculated. And the way they would inoculate themselves is they would take a little bit of the the pus you get from like the wound of someone who has smallpox, and they would cut themselves and make an open wound, and then kind of spread that pus into their wound, and then kind of be under medical supervision. I mean, that's as much as you could be in Africa or whatever, but then they would be kind of cured of it, And so they would basically, when Cotton Mather found out about this, he told the people of Boston, but they actually were not receptive because they didn't believe, for a number of reasons, actually, they didn't believe that it was like right religiously because they thought it was against God to introduce diseases to the body. And they also didn't want to hear about it because they were racist, and the idea was coming from like the slaves that just came off the boat. They thought also just gave them smallpox, so they were just like, not loving the idea. But there was another doctor. See, I'm not sure of his name. I get it real fast here. Boylston, I believe his name was. Yeah, Zabdiel Boylston was the only doctor in town that would work with Cotton. They actually ended up inoculating 240 something people, and of those 240, only 6 people died. Whereas like the smallpox that ran through the city of Boston killed like almost 900 people, something like that. So like it was shown in the aftermath that what they did was actually pretty successful. So that kind of gave the vaccination train a little more steam, if you will. And that will bring us to the late 1770s. That's where we really get to the modern vaccine creation, or where they really start to try to figure out how to make a vaccine. So the first person to really kind of look at that is a man named Benjamin Jesty. And he doesn't get credit for it, but he really is the first person to make the connection between cowpox and smallpox. And he did so in 1774, but he didn't actually publicize his findings. So Edward Jenner gets all the credit when he would do so 22 years later in 1796. But the main technology that he figured out, that the Jenner would also go on to understand, is that you could use cowpox as a more weakened form of smallpox to basically kind of vaccinate people or inoculate people against smallpox. Because cowpox is like smallpox, but just not as serious. It's not deadly. Because what they found, what he found was that when the maidens, the milk maidens, I think that's what you call them, when they would milk the infected cows who had cowpox, they would get like these kind of wart-looking things on their hands, and so they would get cowpox, but they wouldn't die from it. So they would just use the cowpox and then kind of help people not get smallpox. So that's the technology behind what basically kicked off the modern vaccine for smallpox. And so in May of 1796, English physician Edward Jenner actually inoculates 8-year-old James Phipps. He was one of the first people to ever be vaccinated. He does so. He inoculates him with a cowpox with matter collected from a cowpox sore on the hand of a milkmaid, like we said. And despite suffering a reaction and not feeling good for a little while, he made a full recovery, and he was fine. And actually, 2 months later, Jenner would actually infect him with, or the same kid, he would infect him with human, like a human smallpox sore to kind of see if he had really been, cured. And he was. The kid was fine. So he was the first person to truly be vaccinated against smallpox. The term vaccine comes from the Latin word for cow, vacca. So that's where we get vaccine because cowpox is the impetus for the smallpox vaccine. Now, Louis Pasteur, he creates the first laboratory-produced vaccine. This is a vaccine for fowl cholera in chickens. He also had something to do with rabies vaccines. He was the guy who kind of did that too. I think they said he pumped himself full of rabies vaccines. I could have read that wrong, but I thought I read that somewhere. Okay, so if you're wondering, like I was, all the different what are the different types of diseases or viruses that have been cured, or at least, because that's the thing, when you look at it, there's only been one actually fully eradicated virus on the face of the earth, and that is smallpox. I didn't know that when I started this. The rest of them, they're kind of controlled by people being vaccinated, but they can still pop up. That's the weird thing. But with smallpox, it's been it's gone. I forget the actual case. I may have the down here, like the last person to get smallpox, but it's been a while, and that's why it's different, because the rest of them, because people still get all these other ones, but things like rabies, mumps, measles, polio, pertussis, rubella, varicella, not trying to rhyme, hepatitis B, influenza, all that stuff. Like, so that's what, from that first cowpox to smallpox creation, we've taken that and used that technology to help, kind of quell all of these different viruses and diseases out there, or really just viruses. Yeah. And there's not that much left to cover as far as the vaccine, discovery and how did that happen. Part of it is I'm gonna list off a couple different types of vaccines. There's the toxioid, or excuse me, is that right? No. Yes. No. TOXIOD, I believe it is, vaccine. They are used to vaccinate against diseases like diphtheria and tetanus. There's a subunit vaccine, which includes only the components of a pathogen that stimulate the immune system, as opposed to including the entire pathogen. There are live attenuated vaccines, and they are made by wearing the disease-causing virus, meaning it contains live virus to induce immunity, but in a form that cannot cause serious illness. So yeah, like I said, smallpox is the main reason we have all of this technology, pretty much, and since it's eradicated, I was wondering, and I found what's going on with it now. So who has what if it were to come back? Do we have the virus, or are we in case we need to recreate it or whatever? But the answer is yes, basically. So following the eradication of smallpox, the scientists and people in the know wanted to still perform research using the variola virus, and so they agreed to reduce the number of laboratories that hold stocks of it to only 4 locations around the whole world. Let's see, and it was in the U.S., England, Russia, and South Africa. Those were the 4 places that had it. And by 1984, England and South Africa had destroyed their stock of the variola virus vis-a-vis the smallpox virus, and now there are only 2 locations in the entire globe that actually have the variola virus, and one of them is at the CDC center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the other is in Kosovo, Russia. Who would have ever thought that if you ever need to get access to smallpox, if this is ever going to be like the next plot to the next Fast and the Furious movie, they're either going to be in Atlanta or Russia. And that is how vaccines happen. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The first vaccines occurred at least 1,000 years ago in the form of variolation. Smallpox was the main driving force behind the development of vaccines. The first modern vaccine was administered in the 1800s. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so for the things I didn't know before, I got a couple this time. I'm gonna talk about polio for a little bit because I didn't really cover it at all in the actual vaccine part of it. But I know when some people think of vaccines, they think of polio. For me, I didn't know much of any of the stuff, like I said before. So once I really found all the smallpox information, I really thought that I just kind of went with that as far as like the main focus of the episode. But this was also another one that was very widespread during a time, which is very interesting. They even had to close movie theaters and swimming pools during the polio outbreak in the 50s. And in 1952, the number of polio cases in the U.S. peaked at 57,879 cases, with over 3,000 deaths. People were dying of this, and those who survived would usually end up with some form of paralysis, sometimes in wheelchairs, or they would be put into an iron lung. I don't know if you've ever seen an iron lung. It's a very just robust machine. It doesn't resemble a lung in any way, shape, or fashion. But polio was eliminated in the Western Hemisphere by a vaccine that was developed by Jonas Salk. He did so by using an inactivated polio virus as the antigen that would actually, help vaccinate people against the virus itself. Another thing that I didn't know before that I found was how the Spanish government handled their vaccinations in the early 1800s. So basically, an issue that they had while trying to develop vaccines was they didn't have anybody to kind of be the host of said vaccine, while it's being developed to make it, make it palatable for human consumption. So what they did, what old King Carlos IV, what he did was he made a plan that involved a ship, a crew, and 22 orphans. And so he took the orphans out onto the ship, and the idea was to set sail and then vaccinate the children in succession, with one child being provided the cowpox pus, and to the next one, and then so on and so forth. Just pass it on down, kids. And they would form a human chain, and that would ensure access to the valuable viral material. So that's how Spain handled their vaccines. I thought that was just very old timey, but not that old. I'm talking like 200 years ago. He was just like, no one cares about these kids. It's been proven. You know what I mean? We have a whole, no one's coming for them. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Learned a lot about vaccines and where they came from, their origin. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. As always, if you want more of How Did That Happen, you can head over to hdthappen.com, where you'll find all the written transcripts of this episode that you just heard. There's also a works cited up there where you can find all the information that I found. Not much more to say, I think, about the episode. Like and subscribe wherever you find this podcast. If you want to give us 5 stars, that's awesome. If you want to give us 2 stars and say why you didn't want to give us 5 stars, that's fine as well. Constructive criticism is always welcome. As always, thanks for pressing play, and see you in a couple days with the next BSB.
Littleton Coin Company is ringing in the holiday season with daily deals. Visit littletoncoin.com for at least 15% off select products now through November 28th. Save on your favorite coins, such as Morgan Silver Dollars, Kennedy Half Dollars, commemorative quarters, and much more. But hurry, each day offers a new deal you don't want to miss. Visit us now at littletoncoin.com. That's littletoncoin.com. Littleton Coin Company, serving collectors since 1945.
Celebrate Thanksgiving with Safeway. This week at Safeway, get whole Signature Farms frozen turkey 10 to 15.5 pounds for $8 each, or 16.1 to 22 pounds for $10 each. Member price of the minimum $50 purchase. Limit 1 per household. Plus, packs of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, 7-Up, Dr. Pepper, or AHA Sparkling Water are buy 2, get 3 free. Limit 3 free items. Also this week, get 5-pound bags of Signature Farms russet potatoes for 97 cents each with digital coupon. Limit 1. Visit Safeway.com or head in store for more details.